On today's Murder, She Wrote podcast, Jessica finds trouble in the Deep South and in Seattle. Alright. Hello and welcome to the Murder, She Wrote podcast, where I try to watch every single episode of the hit 80s/90s show Murder, She Wrote, starring the fabulous Angela Lansbury. Today we're going to be talking about episodes 6 and 7. It's a Dog's Life, air date November 4th, 1984, and Lovers and Other Killers, air date November 14th, 1984. It has been forever and a day since I have visited Murder, She Wrote, and I have not watched it for a long time that I'm going to have to rewatch all the episodes again because I forgot where I had left off. I had a terrible ear problems in June and July, so that's why I haven't had any episodes out. And you would think with this pandemic, being stuck home and not being able to go anywhere and do as much stuff as I would like, that I would have it be all the way to the 12th season by now, but unfortunately I'm not. Life sometimes gets in the way. So I'm doing 2 episodes today instead of 1, and I'm going to try to shell them out as best I can. So let's dive into It's a Dog's Life. Now, before I got sick, I had recorded this episode, but I had mixed up the episode numbers, which is easy to do because especially when you have a show with a pilot movie, the internet tells you different. They count the pilot movie as an episode, and it's not. It's a movie. So this is episode 6 and 7, and episode 6 is It's a Dog's Life. So we start off this episode, someone is walking menacingly towards some horse stables. And one more thing before I start. And I had tried to upload it, but because I thought it was episode 5, even though episode 5 was Hooray for Homicide, YouTube thought it was a duplication, so it wouldn't upload it. So I decided to just re-record it because I lost the file from where I recorded the other one, so I just decided to do them both in one full swoop for you. Alright, so anyway, we start off, It's a Dog's Life, air date November 4th, 1984. Someone is menacingly walking towards horse stables, and when they finally reach a horse called Stardust, the horse looks happy when it's on camera. It's getting fed something. But we know that this something is not good, because the music tells us. We then find ourselves in an old plantation house in the Deep South. The Langley Estate says a sign that we can see when we see the exterior shot. Jessica is there visiting her cousin, Abby, who is the animal trainer on site, I believe, and she's there. And it happens to be Dunton Langley's 80th birthday. We get introduced to his children. We first get introduced to Trish Langley, the family drunk, Spencer Langley, the family gambler, Morgana, who is into tea leaves and horoscopes and astral charts and what the stars are saying, and is considered crazy. But nowadays, that's actually considered a really good art form, so she was just ahead of her time, in my opinion. And we also get introduced to her daughter, Echo. Yes, her name really is Echo. I don't understand why, but that's her name. And all of them are your typical rich family that just wants Dunton's money and doesn't really care what happens to him. Even though Spencer raises his glass and tells him, "Happy birthday, Father," it's not a really happy sentiment. When we see Jessica, she's drinking punch and she's talking to Dunton, who is showing her paintings of horses and trying to flirt with her. But she tells him that she's wise to his tricks because Abby told her. Abby comes in and Dunton talks about what a great asset she is to the estate and that how much he cares for her. And um, and then we get introduced to the star of our show, Teddy the Beagle. um, and any scene that this dog is in, he just steals the show for me, and it's why it's one of my favorite episodes. And he is his favorite dog. They decide to go on a horse ride around the property to celebrate his 80th birthday. And Trish has been drinking all day, and Abby basically says, "You shouldn't ride in your condition, it's bad for the horse." But Trish says as soon as her father dies, the first thing she's going to do is kick Abby off of the property, and gets on the horse anyway. Dunton insists upon riding Stardust after Jessica makes a comment that she could ride him. So there's no close-ups, and we don't see Angela Lansbury actually ride a horse in this episode. Maybe they use stunt doubles, but they go around and everything seems to be going fine until Trish comes up next to Dunton and goes "wee" and spooks the horse, and the horse gets so spooked it jumps over a bush as Dunton screams "Tally ho!" and he breaks his neck, and Teddy is seen licking his face, crying, and it's so cute. Immediately, the family members are not upset over this guy's death. Like I said before, all they care about is his money, and Mrs. Fletcher immediately suspects foul play, tells the sheriff, to basically test the horse to see if there was any drugs in its system. The next day, while they're at Abby's house, the tests come back negative, and Mrs. Fletcher is completely and utterly surprised. "I could have swore something would be in there," and Abby said that most drugs are untraceable, and by the time they found the horse, it probably was out of its system already. But Abby asks her to stay at least until after the will reading, that all his family cared about was money, and that probably one of them killed him. Meanwhile, at the estate, we get introduced to Marcus Boswell, Dunton's lawyer. He comes in with a VHS and says that it's the latest in will reading. Basically, what would happen with this, in case you all have been wondering, and you don't know, basically the person who died would record themselves in front of a video camera, basically telling their relatives what they inherited or whatever. It wouldn't surprise me nowadays that people recorded their wills on their phone. It's replaced everything else. So he puts it into the VCR player and starts playing it. Dunton basically insults every member of his family. He insults Trish for her drinking, Spencer for his gambling, Morgana for her fantasy world, and then surprises them all by telling them that he's giving away his paintings to a museum, and that the profits that they would have normally got is going to the museum. And his estate comes to about $18 million, and it all goes to his faithful friend and companion, Teddy the dog. The family is literally angry and shocked. And they did a similar episode of this on Designing Women, and I don't know if you can actually leave everything to an animal nowadays. It wouldn't surprise me if you could, but still. And the family is naturally upset, and Echo goes, "Oh my goodness, you cannot be serious. Teddy's a dog." And Mr. Boswell says, "I assure you it's valid, because I helped him write it, so there's no way that you can change it. So everyone is visually shocked. Abby gets to stay on as the animal person because Mr. Boswell wants her to keep watch over Teddy so that the family doesn't try to hurt him. But they're visually shocked and, like, amazed that this has happened, that Dunton has done this to them. So, later that day, Trish is practicing with her horse. I don't know if she's practicing for a race or what's going on, but she keeps hitting the horse repeatedly with her riding crop. And Abby says, Trish, you don't need to do that. A simple pat on the head will do. You don't have to continue hitting that poor horse. And Trish says to Spencer, I want her off the property. And she says, well, you don't have a say. Mr. Boswell and Teddy have a say in whether or not I stay. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm staying. Spencer goes into the barn to get something, and Teddy attacks him, trying to bite him, and has appeared to have gone rabid. Everyone comes, and Mrs. Fletcher notices that there's blood on Teddy's ear. And then this hillbilly guy, Tom Cassidy, comes down, or no, not Tom Cassidy, his name's Barnes, and he comes down the street, and he says that Teddy bit him, and he has, like, what appears to look like a cast, and has blood on it. So Teddy gets arrested, but not fully arrested, because we don't see him in jail. Then he's released on his own recognizance. I kid you not, I swear. I swear, this is how the episode does this. He's released on his own recognizance. Mrs. Fletcher and Abby go to Mr. Boswell's office and find Morgana there trying to protest the will. And Abby and Mrs. Fletcher are put into his office, and he tells them that the family is all getting together trying to declare Teddy incompetent so they can try to get the will revoked so they can get him, so they can get the money. And but Mr. Boswell assures them that he's not going to allow that to happen. He keeps getting interrupted several times throughout the scene as his secretary says that his broker is calling. Apparently he owes a great deal of money because he invested some money in something that went south, and it was Spencer's fault. So he promises that he will get him a check at the end of the week. So later that night, despite everyone hating her for some odd reason, Abby's at the estate. Teddy goes to visit his favorite friend, the security guard, and that's only been hired to watch the paintings. And as he tells Teddy that he's going to miss him. And he then notices a car come and someone, Trish, stumbling out of a car to open the gate. The security guard leaves to go outside to go help Trish and leaves Teddy alone in the room by himself, the door locked behind him. As he goes out, though, the gate begins to close and Trish dies instantly. Morgana claims that she saw her sister's body rise up off of the ground to go to heaven, but no one believes her, of course. Mrs. Fletcher comes, as does Boswell, and Mrs. Fletcher tells Abby that Abby says she believes that the murderer could be someone in that very house. Mrs. Fletcher says, that's exactly what I think. So, after this, as they're talking about that, Mr. Boswell comes into the kitchen and says that they need ice for drinks. And Mrs. Fletcher notices a strange stain on his trouser pants. He claims he had a flat tire. He gets the ice and goes out back in the living room. Mrs. Fletcher goes out and is looking around at the crime and helps Deputy Will pick up the coat to put it into a bag, and notices that it was custom made for Trish, and the shoulders seem to be ripped a little bit because someone who it wasn't made for was wearing it. So that means somebody else was wearing Trish's coat before it was put on her. So Mrs. Fletcher has a theory. They find Teddy's paw print on the button that closes the gate. Echo gets all excited and goes, "There goes the will," and Boswell goes, "Over my dead body it does." So Mrs. Fletcher has a theory, and she tells it to all of them. She basically says, that someone wore Trish's coat to get the security guard's attention for him to go out, so Teddy would be alone in the room. The person got up off the ground, went and got Trish, put her in front of the gate so that she would die, and then Teddy was trained to hear a certain sound to push the button. And they find Abby's whistle, and they arrest both Teddy and Abby. And that is in your visual aid at the top, because Abby is sitting or standing over at the jail going, "Oh, it's so dreadful being told that being accused of something you didn't do, and well, I guess I don't have to tell you that." And the camera pans over and Teddy's literally laying on the jail bed looking miserable. So Jessica now decides, since one of her family members is involved in the murder, she has to investigate. Mr. Boswell drops her off and she makes a mental note to look at his tires, and then she's looking for a bicycle clip. And the Deputy Will happens to come by and ask her what she's looking for, and she goes, "A plain old bicycle clip." And she says, "You'll know it when you see it." Meanwhile, she goes walking and she discovers Barnes's place, and that Sawdust is there and Spencer is there, and that Barnes and Spencer was basically in on the giving Teddy drugs to make him look like he was rabid, to try to break the will, but it didn't work. But Spencer insists he did not kill his father, nor did he kill his sister. But Jessica says that she has a pretty good idea of who it is. But Barnes wants to try to kill her. But Spencer says, "Stop it, Barnes. Don't stop acting like a hillbilly." So he doesn't kill Mrs. Fletcher, obviously. So then we go to the coroner in a court-like setting. I don't know if this would ever happen in real life, but Mrs. Fletcher decides to present her evidence to the coroner until he's basically satisfied with who the killer is. I don't know why they're doing it with the coroner. You would think they'd be doing it with the sheriff or the police people. I don't know. But basically, Mrs. Fletcher brings all the parties involved, and because we have an array of suspects, we have Trish as a suspect, we have all the Langleys as a suspect. It could be either one of them. So Mrs. Fletcher gets up and she basically redoes her scenario of how Trish died, and she says the only person that could have killed Trish knew about the will beforehand. Probably told her that she owed a great deal, that she was going to inherit a great deal of money. And she probably was surprised when the video was played, and only one person knew the contents of the will. Boswell sits up and says, "Now, wait just a minute, Mrs. Fletcher. You're not implying that I had anything to do with it." And she said, "Well, you had a lot more to gain. You owed a great deal of money to your broker. You had done some bad investments. So who else but you?" "Well," he says, "it's just not true." "Well, She then produces evidence of his bicycle clip and says that she saw the stain on his trousers, which would only happen if he didn't have a bicycle clip and it got on his trousers. He gets up again. He says, "Now, I told you I had a flat tire." And she said, "No, you did not. I saw your tires as you drove away. The tread was not new. The spare in your trunk has never been used." He said, "Well, I bet you if you go look in my trunk, the spare has been used." She said, "Why don't we? And I bet you it'll be in there." And she brings Teddy in, and Deputy Will blows the whistle that they found that was Abby's, and Teddy doesn't do anything. So, Mrs. Ledger explains that this is a whistle that dogs cannot hear, so it could not possibly be that. She mentions that the security guard heard birds that night. So, Mrs. Fletcher is now at the fever pitch, and Mr. Boswell gets up and says, "My friends and neighbors are not going to believe this poppycock." He literally does say that. I promise you. And she plays the sound of the birds. Teddy pushes the button 3 or 4 different times, then jumps off the chair and walks right over to Mr. Boswell, stands up on his hind legs waiting for his treat. Mrs. Fletcher goes over and says, "Aren't you going to give him his treat? Like you did when you taught him how to murder Trish?" Now, at this point, he's cornered. He has said everything that he could possibly say, and now that she's finally got him, he has nothing to say. He collapses into sobs, and it's like, seriously, dude? You have been challenging her every step of the way, and then she finally nails you, and you just collapse into a fit of sobs. The family does not even seem to be all that upset about this, or upset about Trish's death. They seem to completely and utterly, not even care about the money anymore. Tom Cassidy is actually Dunton's best friend who gave him a gun, and he gets custody of Teddy and calls Teddy the millionaire stud. Abby goes back to London, and we don't know what happens to the Langleys. But I love this episode because it's played as serious as it can be. There's not one moment where the actors are not being very serious about this. And there's only 2 noticeable guest stars in this episode. One is Caitlin Damian, who played Morgana. She played the role of Mary Campbell on Soap, and this is one of her last television appearances before her death in 1987 at the age of 56. And her last known movie was she's having a baby, and she was on the television show Webster and the Love Boat. And she was really funny on that. Another noticeable guest star is Lynn Redgrave, who played Abby. She is known for... She died, unfortunately, in 2010 at the age of 67. She's known for God and Monsters, Geometry Girl, Shine, and Kingsley. Her last known credit is Ugly Betty, one of my favorite shows. She was also in Confessions of a Shopaholic, the cartoon series Me and Eloise. She was in 2003 version of Peter Pan, did some voice work on The Wild Thornberrys. She was also on The Nanny. She starred in the television remake of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane as Jane Hudson. I remember that one fondly, and it was not good. This is her only appearance for Murder, She Wrote. All the rest of them, that play the Langley family aren't really known for anything good. And these are their only appearances in a Murder, She Wrote episode. So, yeah. Overall, I love that episode. Now, next, we're going to be talking about Lovers and Other Killers. Air date November 14th, 1984. This was shot on location in Seattle and the University of Washington. So, we start off this episode in someone's apartment. Someone is ransacking it. And we don't know exactly why they're ransacking it, but they are. A woman comes stumbling in who's clearly drunk, and she's in a dress that looks like it was a curtain at one point, and she stumbles in, and she notices that something is not right. She notices that all her clothes are thrown out, and she picks up a music box, and there's this weird moment where the killer comes in and notices her kneeling down looking at this jewelry box, and there's this point where she gets up like she's going to like fight the person, and they strangle her with her pearls and she dies. And this woman is not credited. I don't know who plays her. I don't even remember her name from the beginning of the episode. She's not very memorable, except for that dress. So then we find ourselves at Seattle Airport. Jessica is meeting her best friend, Dr. Edmund Gerard, played by Peter Graves. They went to college together with Jessica's late husband, Frank, and she's doing a series of lectures at the University of Washington in Seattle. And when she comes off of her plane, she has a baby in her arms. And Edmund's like, "You said you were bringing someone, but I didn't think it would be this." And she was like, "Oh, Edmund, you're so funny." She was like, "I've been holding this baby for these two nuns who are Chinese, and Jessica can apparently speak Chinese." And she hands the baby to them, and that's that. They go directly from the airport to his office. He's the dean at the university, and asked her to do a series of lectures about her book, The Corpse Danced at Midnight, because apparently that was her first book that she published, because that's the one that they were making into a movie in Hooray for Homicide. So in this particular, so we get introduced to Amelia, played by Lois Nettleson. I'll get to what they played in a little bit later, like I did at the end of the previous episode I talked about. They are sitting in the office, and she's a secretary. She tells Jessica that she'd be more than willing to be her secretary too, but Jessica says she doesn't want to take her away from Edmund. So she wants to run an ad for a secretary while she's in town. So Amelia decides to do that. Then she asks Edmund, she said, "Did you really get an inflatable raft at a sporting goods store? What are you going to do with that?" And he says, "Well, I thought I would go whitewater rafting or something." And she said, "I'm surprised he keeps any of his money at all." So, he goes, there she goes, acting like a wife again. And this seems to hurt her. You know, it seems to make her really upset that he would say this to her. And Jessica picks up on it because she's so intuitive. And she basically says, as they're walking around the university, he basically, is like, "I still can't believe that you, me, and Frank all went to college together." he said, you picked the wrong guy. You should have picked me. And Mrs. Fletcher was like, no, I don't think so. I think that we picked the right people. And she tells him, you know that she's in love with you, right? And he goes, who? Amelia. And he goes, oh no, you're wrong, Jessica. So later that night, Jessica's at the hotel, and there's a knock at her door. And we get introduced to the most weirdest character I've seen in any episode of Murder, She Wrote thus far, David Talver, played by Andrew Stevens. He says he saw the ad, or heard at the university she was looking for a secretary, and he wanted to come by because anyone would give their right tooth to basically be Jessica Fletcher's secretary because she's a famous author now. So he comes in the door, and he has a charm about him, dimples and all, and Mrs. Fletcher is not sure she wants to hire him because he is a male, and she's never had a secretary, male or female, but she figured, secretaries are supposed to be women. But he proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that he can type real fast. She selects a random page and he writes it. Then when she's talking and says, I really can use a woman as my secretary, he writes it down rather quickly, and she hires him on the spot. The next day she goes for a lecture where she's talking about her book, and this episode features two things that are in the opening credits. The shot where the gun she fires has a thing that says bang on it, and then when she gets pushed down the stairs, which is in your visual aid of this collage that you're looking at right now as you're listening to this. So she does that, and the class really likes her, and we're introduced to a man named Tom. He's a professor, or Todd, Professor Todd, but he's not really all that important. But I'll get more into his character here in a minute. So after the lecture, Mrs. Fletcher goes home to find David sitting on the couch reading, and she goes, I don't think I'm paying you to read. And he goes, oh, I'm off the clock a couple hours ago. I just decided to read and lost track of time. I got everything done that you asked me to get done. And she looks at it and she goes, this is very good. And he goes, do you want to go to dinner? And she says, well, I don't really want to have beer and pizza like you young kids have. And he goes, no, we can go to this really nice French restaurant in town. And she says, well, oh, can you afford that? And he goes, no, but you can. And they go. We don't see them eat, but they're talking, and he tells Mrs. Fletcher that he's very fond of her and starts rubbing her hands seductively. And she's oblivious to it at first, but quickly doesn't want to be involved with a younger man. As they're leaving, we get introduced to Lieutenant Andrews, played by Greg Morris, who wants David to go to the police station in regards to the murder at the beginning of the episode. He claims that he was in his room all night studying, and that's his alibi. Mrs. Fletcher goes and tracks down Lieutenant Andrews, and Lieutenant Andrews says that him and this woman were involved for several months. She bought the car he drives. She gave him lots of money. They seem to be intimately involved because David seems to be attracted to older women, especially older women that have lots and lots of money. So Mrs. Fletcher is very worthy of hiring this man. When she comes home, to her hotel, she finds him there, already there. She tells him not to let himself in and that she's not sure she wants to use him anymore. He basically explains to her that he got into a car accident with the woman at the beginning of the episode, and she gave him a check for a new car, and basically, told him that, and they became friends. And she didn't want to get the police involved or the insurance people involved because she was involved in lots of accidents because she was an alcoholic. And he enjoyed her company very much, but they were not intimate. Despite this, Miss Fletcher asks him to leave because she's still not sure. There's something about this guy that's not quite right. She then gets a call from a woman named Lila, who claims that David could not have possibly have been with anywhere near the woman because he was with her. But she's going to tell her she wants to meet her at midnight in an abandoned warehouse. And for some reason, even though Mrs. Fletcher says on the phone to this girl, I don't know you, I've never met you before, I'm not going to meet you, she goes anyway. And it's down by the port of Seattle. So they go, so she goes into this warehouse. She gets a cab to go there, and she goes into the warehouse, and at first we don't see Lila, and then we find her coming out of the warehouse, and she's been stabbed, and she dies. She had an abusive husband named Jack, and he was very abusive, and she didn't want to be with him anymore. So the Lieutenant Andrews immediately thinks that it was David who killed her, but he was at his house all night. And so Mrs. Fletcher is confused. The next day at the police station, David tells Lieutenant Andrews that they were with each other all that night because she was scared of her husband and he was going to kill her. So her husband probably would kill him. So Mrs. Fletcher goes to the swimming area at the university, runs into Jack, who doesn't seem to be upset that his wife has been murdered, and tells Mrs. Fletcher that she asks way too many questions, and she goes, well, I'm nosy. See, at least she's honest. And he doesn't seem to be upset about his wife's death. There's like no remorse there whatsoever. He's like, well, life goes on. And she's late for her lesson. So she decides to stop talking about her book and gets the class into thinking like the killer. And this is where Todd comes in again, and basically it's implied that he could be a suspect because he's cheating on his wife. With Lila, I guess, as well. But he's not in the episode enough to establish that. So this scene is completely wasted, but it's really good, this scenario that she comes up with. He has to know, for the killer to come up with an alibi for himself as well as A, B, or C, he has to know what A, B, and C are doing ahead of time so he can come up with an alibi for all of those people, to come up with an alibi for himself. But Miss Fletcher still hasn't figured out the killer yet. But she's close. So, after that lecture, she goes back to her hotel and goes into a refrigerator to get something to eat. So I guess it's like a mini apartment, I'm not sure. And then she notices there's a note from David on the refrigerator. Because even though Edmund tells her not to hire him and says it's a mistake, she continues and lets him to continue work for her. And when she comes home that day, or back to the hotel that day, she sees a note on the refrigerator from him, and it says, I'm done for the day, I had to go out to study for an upcoming class. Professor Laura B, that's Todd, called you and asked you to meet him, that it was urgent and confidential. And normally in most episodes Jessica's smart, but for some reason she goes to an abandoned warehouse to meet a woman she's never met before, and now she's going to meet Professor Todd, and she doesn't even know why. Well, as she's walking up the stairs, she gets pushed down the stairs by someone, and David happens to come by and help her, implying to you, the viewer, and me, the viewer, that he could possibly be the killer. So they go to the hospital, and Edmund comes in, and he's like, this was no accident. Just admit it. You did it. And he was like, and you weren't with Lila that night that you killed that woman, or that woman was killed. I was with her. And it's like, why didn't you say this before? I mean, she's literally been dead for almost a couple of days now, and you're just now mentioning this? So this shocks Jessica and confuses her and confused the hell out of me. So the next day they're at a restaurant near the tower in Seattle that they always show in Grey's Anatomy, which I think is cool looking and I'd like to see someday. She's basically, they're eating breakfast, I believe, and he says, I want to tell you about me and Lila. And Jessica's like, you don't really need to tell me. And he explains that her and David were just friends, and that him and Lila were lovers because she was trying to get away from Jack because he was abusive and scared her. So he was trying to help her, and they were together at a motor lodge that night and almost got ran off by a car. Mrs. Fletcher finds this to be fascinating. She goes back to the hotel only to find David in the hotel waiting for her. She's angry that he got in again and said, I told you not to do that. And he says, but I had to tell you what happened, because he apparently paid Lila, to pretend to be his alibi so that Mrs. Fletcher would believe him. Why, I don't know. And that he doesn't have an alibi, an airtight alibi, for the night that the woman at the beginning of the episode died. He tells her that, she said, how do I know you didn't push me down the stairs? He was like, I didn't, I swear. I took that phone call, the voice sounded muffled over the phone, and they said it was urgent. But you didn't actually speak to Mr. Lowerby, did you? And he was like, no, I don't think so. The voice sounded soft. It didn't sound like him. So Mrs. Fletcher realizes it wasn't Lowerby that made the call, and she goes, it was a person. You're right, David, it was a person. So she leaves, and she goes to the lecture hall where Professor Lowery is, Todd, and Todd basically tells her, I told my wife what I've been doing, and she's such a terrific gal that we're going to go on vacation, and we're going to work this thing out. And she goes, I thought I saw someone ding your car outside. Don't you own that dark blue car? And he says, no, my wife dropped me off. She went to go shopping for our trip. We drive a station wagon. So it all clicks into place for Mrs. Fletcher. She runs into Edmund's office and goes, where is he, Amelia? Where is he? We need to find him and warn him. And Amelia's like, warn him about what? What's going on, Mrs. Fletcher? And she says, that Lieutenant Andrews is going to go get a warrant. He thinks that Edmund killed Lila Stroder, and that he doesn't have an airtight alibi, and that his car was seen there. And she goes, but everybody has that kind of car. I even have a dark blue car. And then Mrs. Fletcher says, you're lying to me. You know that. She was like, Edmund and Lila have been seeing each other secretly for weeks. And she was like, and you know that, Amelia, because they've been out at the Motor Lodge Inn. And she goes, I've never even heard of that place. And she said, you're the only one that could have known, because you pay his bills. You complained about the inflatable raft when I first came here 2 weeks ago. It would show up on his credit card bill that they were there. So the only one that would have known was you. So it turns out that Amelia loved Edmund so much that she killed Lila because she was afraid that Lila would tell the truth about what she had done. David's free and clear, has not done anything wrong, but it's implied at the end of the episode that he might have killed the woman at the beginning of the episode, because her death is not solved, because Amelia has no reason whatsoever to kill the woman in the episode, because Edmund didn't even know her. So that's unresolved, and it leaves you thinking that maybe David did kill her because something's not right with that character. And he tells Jessica before the episode ends that he's fallen in love with her. Why won't you give me a chance? And she says, you might become a character in one of my books. And he goes, am I going to be a suspect, a murder victim, or the killer? And she goes, I'm not sure yet. And the camera zooms in on him, making you wonder if he really is the killer of the woman that died in the beginning of the episode. And of course, we probably never find out because the episodes don't really have continuity. She doesn't really talk about cases. So, famous guest stars in this episode was Peter Graves. As you know, Peter Graves was known for being in the airplane movie, and the original Mission Impossible television show. He unfortunately passed away in 2010 at the age of 83. He was in 138 different things. His last known credit is the official walkthrough of Dark Star, a TV miniseries that I've never heard of. He was a recurring character as the grandfather on Seventh Heaven. He narrated the biography about celebrities that I wish they'd bring back. He was on the Golden Girls, which I love him on that. He was on the Love Boat, of course. Fantasy Island, Mission Impossible, the original show. He had a long and prosperous career, and a really great actor. Then we have Lois Nettleson, who played his secretary, Amelia. She unfortunately passed away in 2008 at the age of 80. Her last known credit was one of my favorite Hallmark Christmas movies, and really that's a rare thing for me, The Christmas Card. She also guest starred on The Golden Girls as Jean, the lesbian that falls in love with Rose. And that's one of my all-time favorite episodes, so her and Peter Graves have something in common. She also guest starred on Baywatch Nights. And this will not be her only Murder, She Wrote episode. She will appear in 2 other ones. She was also on Full House. And she was in one of my all-time favorite films, The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, as Burt Reynolds' love interest. Well, supposed to be. But she was in 126 different things and had a long, prosperous career. And she's known for a lot of things. David was played by Andrew Stevens, but I honestly, he's still alive and acting to this very day. He's known for The Broderick Saints, 300 Miles to Graceland, The Whole 9 Yards, and The Pledge. He's still acting to this very day. His latest credit is 47 Hours to Live as a weatherman. This is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. Oh wait, no. He will appear in one more other episode of Murder, She Wrote, and he was also on Dallas as Casey, and he was on The Love Boat, and in the miniseries Hollywood Wives, which is a book I'm currently reading. But he's been in over 91 different things. And as for Professor Todd, he was played by Andrew Pine, which I don't recognize him, so we shall see what he's in. He is still alive. He is known for the film Gettysburg that came out in 1993, the original Miracle Worker in 1962. He played James Keller, Lords of Salem. His last known credit is from 2015, Beyond the Furthest Star. He was in 183 different things. He was in Crime CSI in 2005. Weird Science, the TV series, Any Day Now. I love that show. Wish it was on DVD. Walker, Texas Ranger, Baywatch Nights, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Star Trek The Next Generation, and he apparently appears in a handful of other Murder, She Wrote episodes. He also guest starred in The Heat of the Night. He's been in a lot of stuff. Has a long career. So overall, I really loved It's a Dog's Life. I felt that was a really great episode because it's played as serious as it can be, but you can tell that it's a season 1 episode because they would never do something like that on a show today. And Lovers and Other Killers is very interesting as it doesn't solve the first murder, like I said. So, and there's no continuity there. I don't think we ever see David again. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope I'm entertaining you during this pandemic. I will be posting my review of Little House on the Prairie Season 3 soon, and I will try to keep on going with the episodes of Murder, She Wrote to get them out there. Thank you, have a nice day, and have a nice evening, and happy crime solving.